Hi, I'm Donna Spencer and I'm an information architect. Apparently that's a bit uncool at the moment. We're all UX designers, experience designers, service designers, but I love things to do with categories, words, language, labelling, information and all those messy connections between them. I do all those UXy things as well, but my favourite projects are always information architecture ones. I've written two IA related books, Card Sorting, which is an information architecture technique, and A Practical Guide to Information Architecture, which you can probably guess what that's about. And I ride motorcycles. Today I'm going to talk briefly about some of the many IA questions that I've been asked over and over again in my role as an information architect. These are all slightly counterintuitive. They are all things that seem easy, which is why people ask me all the time. But they're surprisingly hard. They all seem to start with, why can't we just arrange this by audience? I start with this one as it's the one I'm asked most often and the one I have to explain most often. It comes about because it seems completely obvious. We have customers, we think of them as particular groups, we create our products around those groups. So why don't we just use that on the website? Even websites that don't develop products around customer groups think that. It sounds simple until we work through it. To make this work, you need two things. People need to be able to figure out who they are, and content has to split neatly across those audiences. Even these sound straightforward until you start digging into them. For example, a lot of universities use a split of an audience scheme with prospective students, current students, staff, alumni. And it sounds okay, that's what universities are made up of. But it's actually possible for you to be a prospective student for something you're thinking of studying, a current student for what you're doing now, and you might be doing tutoring or something, so your staff as well. Sometimes it's fine, you know who you are when you go to a particular task, but when you're trying to figure out, whether the refectory's open or not, you're none of these. And that's the other thing about audience schemes. They only really work when the content separates nice and neatly around the audiences. I've rarely seen this happen well. There's always content that would suit all audiences or none of them. There are other tricky things with doing this. Whenever we categorise, whether it's for an audience or other scheme, we're creating a representation of the world. We're including some things, excluding others, and representing the domain in a particular way. It's an activity fraught with risk. When we categorise, we communicate to people how the world works. And this means we can exclude people. In categorising of any kind, we have to be super careful not to exclude people or communicate to them that it's a normal way of working. You can see that Dewey had a particular worldview. This is my favourite bad example of an audience scheme because I should have known better. You can see that the categories on this one are authors, sponsors, recruiters, exhibitors, organisers. It's a conference website. When I went to figure out what was being talked about at this conference, I couldn't figure it out. I'm like, oh, well, there's the list of authors, and there's the list of sponsors, and there's the list of recruiters. Where's the program? It was only in digging around that I realised that it's actually information for authors, information for sponsors, information for recruiters. So when you're doing these, you have to also be careful about communicating whether this is a list of people or information for them. So it's all much trickier than it looks. I've rarely made an audience scheme work very well, except actually at a university. Here's the second, why can't we just arrange this by format? Actually, I don't know if anybody actually asks that question. I think in this situation, nobody actually says, why can't we arrange it by format? I think they just do it and kind of pop stuff together. It's often really easy for the content because you know the kinds of content you have, but it's usually not useful for people. This is what the Bunnings website used to look like. You can see that there's books, brochures, calculators, kitchen planners, laundry planners, workshops, videos. So when I went to put up cornicing, the thing that goes around your roof once, I'm like, I have to look at all the things. So I was more excited than you can imagine when I looked at it this week and found out that they've redone it by topic. I could probably actually find those resources now. But I was pretty sad when I was looking for basic resources for accessibility, like what is accessibility and why does it matter? and we've got legislation and guidelines, publications. But I was happy when I looked at another accessibility consultant's website, and at least on this one we've got design, development, understanding accessibility. So I was much happier when I saw that. Another why can't we just order it alphabetically? Come on, I'm sure lots of you have done that one before, or at least heard it. Let me tell you first when alphabetical ordering is okay. It's okay when you have a known item information seeking task. When you know what you want, when you know what to call it, you know when you found it. It's really good when you can look through a list of things and go, yep, there's the one. So it's great for an A to Z index of anything. It can be quite useful. This example from ABC iView, with an alphabetic listing of all their shows, is fantastic. If you want Doctor Who, you can scroll down the list and look for D. Perfectly fine. So it's not all bad. It's just bad when you try to use it for anything else. So any other lists, any other navigation. A to Z is a terrible way to sequence it. There's actually no relationship between letters of the alphabet. There's, they're completely arbitrary. It's just a learned scheme that we know. When we look at a list of things, we subconsciously think that there's some order to them, that there's some kind of grouping or priority. Our basic assumption is that things at the front of the list are more important than things further down a list. So in this example from the Oxfam store, we put home decor towards the front of the list because that's what they're known for, that's what they have most of, it's their priority. We put that at the front, not after books, cards and wraps, Christmas card or Christmas products, home decor. We make some kind of priority with that. In usability testing, you might sometimes hear people say, oh, I wish it was in alphabetical order. But the reason they're saying that isn't because they wish it was in alphabetical order. The reason is because you've asked them to look for something. They have a word in their head and they're pattern matching around the screen trying to figure it out. They wouldn't say that to you if they were looking for a product to buy for their mother-in-law for Christmas. They're not going to say, oh, I wish those were in alphabetical order. So watch for that. Just because they say it doesn't mean that you should do it. I do want to say, though, this really does depend, and information architects are have a cliche that's it depends. I've been much more black and white with those than I usually am. For your context, your situation, some of these might work really well. Think it through, work through it, go back to first principles, don't follow other people's silly rules, and make sure you test what you've done. My last why can't we just makes me cringe, but you've probably heard it before as well. Why can't we just do the design now and pour in the IA later? I don't even know what this one means when I hear this. In my head it's like, because it's just dumb, but I usually don't say that to clients. The real answer is that it doesn't make sense to add the IA to anything. We start with IA. It's not what you add to a site later. I'm not just being precious about my own field, my area of expertise. This matters. Like, this is an example of a content model for my conference. You can see that that we have events, and events have presentations, and events are presented by speakers who present presentations, and presentations have a time and a date and a length and a topic. From this, we can figure out how we might be able to construct navigation, how somebody might move around the site. I can look at this and I can figure out that we can link from the event to the presentations and the event to the speakers and between the speakers and the presentations. But we can't create a list of speakers by topic because that doesn't fit in the content model. We can't create a list of events by topic because that doesn't fit in the content model. We start with this. We don't pour it onto an IA, onto a design later. I still am not quite sure what they're asking me to do. I think maybe the why can't we just put those labels on later on? We don't need to actually think about the structure. So thanks for listening. If you'd like to know more about that, this is 10 minutes out of a 45-minute talk. The rest will be presented at UX New Zealand in a few days and no doubt up on the website later on.